Okay, so we're in Revelation chapter 9. Revelation chapter 9. Revelation 9. And so last week we did verses 1 through to and including verse 4. And I kind of stopped at verse 4, but when I kind of read on verses 5 and 6, I thought, well, I kind of dealt with verses 5 and 6 last week, so I'm not going to read those. I'm just going to start at verse 7. So yeah, tonight we're going to do verses 7 through to and including verse 11. So Revelation 9, verses 7 to 11. Which is quite a lot of verses, but it probably won't take that long. It's just how it works out sometimes. So I'll read those out to you. Verse 7. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. So this is probably one of the points where people start, when they're reading Revelation, start going, "It's what?" Because you can't really picture that. Well, maybe you can. I can't really picture what's been described in my mind. You know, if I was to kind of draw what's being described, it would be very hard to sort of understand that. But that's because I think what we're looking at, we're going to take each one of those little points. They're all just like little symbols, really. You're not meant to understand it as being this strange creature that John's seeing. These are just symbolic terms, really. And that's one of the reasons why I left a message on the Facebook page just saying, you know, if you missed it last week, you might want to watch just to catch up, so I don't have to go and explain everything again, but I will slightly put you in the picture. So from the beginnings of the early church, the New Testament church, which started in Jerusalem, that was the centre, wasn't it? That's where Jesus taught, that's where the apostles were from, that sort of area, if you like. Now the centre of where Christianity is shifts, it moves to the ancient city of Constantinople, or Istanbul, as we call it today, in Turkey. And so that's now the centre of Christianity. And what it does is it's part of what we call the Eastern Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, by this time, has become at least sort of nominally Christianized. You remember I talked about the Emperor Constantine. He now says, right, the official religion of what's left of the Roman Empire now is Christianity. So what happens is that means that the centre of Christianity is now sort of pressed up against another empire, and that is the I said Sasanian, Nazim corrected me, so it's Sasanian Persian Empire. So you've got this two empires, if you like. We've got the Eastern Roman Empire and the Sasanian Persian Empire, and they're sort of almost touching each other. And the Eastern Roman Empire is Christian. The Sasanian Persian Empire, their religion is Zoroastrianism. So that was what we were kind of looking at last week, or what I talked about last week. And so this is a kind of historical clash between two empires, really, and between two religions, between Christianity and Zoroastrianism. And you know, some people sort of say, well, I'm not interested in church history, I'm just interested in, you know, spiritual stuff. But it's like, if you think about it, you know, your church And your Christian life today is going to be history tomorrow. And so what you're looking at really is the church, Christ's church. What happened to them? What troubles did they face? And so on. So, looking at the imagery then that's described here, I believe, and others believe as well, that the locusts that it talks about, let's see, yes, the locusts of verses 1 through to about 6, these locusts are actually the Sasanian Persians, the army of it, and that the smoke of the pit that we looked at is their doctrines, their teaching. Now, calling them locusts it's not like a derogatory term. It's not kind of looking down on them. It's just a way of saying there's so many of them that they're like locusts. You know, a locust destroys what's in front. You know, if you see a plague of locusts coming to a field of sort of wheat or something, they just destroy everything in front of them and leave like just this desolation behind them. And he's sort of saying that's what the army was like. It was so effective, it was so powerful that just everything was just falling before it. And so what we get next is this kind of description of the Sasanian Persians, but not just a visual description of what they looked like, but it's a description of the sort of the spirit in which they come, of their sort of character as well. So let's just take a verse at a time. So verse 7, and sort of 7a if you like, says, the shape of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle. So, you know, we could picture a horse ready for battle in those days. And if you research the facts, you'll find that that heavy armoured cavalry was what formed the backbone of the Sasanian Persian army. In fact, the horses were covered in coats of sort of small metal plates. So they were it was a very heavy kind of cavalry, a bit like knights, if you imagine, sort of with armoured horses. But then it goes on to say, doesn't it, that on their heads were, as it were, crowns of gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. This doesn't mean the horses had faces like men. It means the riders of the horses, you know, their faces were men's faces. And also talks about crowns of gold, which could probably refers to, you know, the shape of the helmet or something they were wearing on their head that looked like a crown. And their faces were as the faces of men, and they had hair as the hair of women. Now, it sounds a bit of a strange thing to say, well, maybe not these days, but what it's saying is, it's not just that they had long hair. There were lots of ancient kind of people that had long hair, but that they kind of, I think Wesley says, they gloried in their hair. In other words, their hair was like carefully styled. You know, it was long, but it was kind of in ringlets, and, you know, they were very kind of proud of their hair. And I actually, I had a look on Google to see if there was any pictures of Sasanian Persians. Oh yes, got a picture. Now, most of this, apart from there's an artist's reconstruction, but most of it is genuine, you know, Sasanian Persian artifacts depicting themselves. And you can have a look if you just want to pass that around. It might give you a bit more of an idea. Their faces were like the face of men, but their hair was like the hair of women. In other words, it was very carefully styled. And they had things that look a bit like crowns on their heads. So you can decide whether you think that does look like what's being described here in the book of Revelation. It goes on to say that their teeth were as the teeth of lions. Now, I don't think it's suggesting they had pointy teeth or something like that, but I think it's rather talking about the spirit in which they come. You know, lions are powerful and majestic, aren't they? This is why so many countries have a lion either on their flag or as part of their, even England or Britain has a lion, doesn't it? And we see the football, they've got 3 lions, because it kind of gives that feeling of, pride and majesty and power and so on. And so that's how they came, powerful, ferocious, majestic, overwhelming. But the image is also used in Scripture, not just to kind of show power, but to depict spiritual danger as well. Maybe you can think of that. Let's have a look at 1 Peter. 1 Peter, you can just put it on the table there. Thank you. So 1 Peter, 1 Peter 5 and verse 8, and most of you you'll know this verse. So Peter says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour." So the picture is kind of metaphorical, I guess. The danger is physical, for sure. They're armed soldiers, cavalry, warriors. The danger is physical, but it's also spiritual. And they are like lions, or their teeth are like lions, because why? Because they're tearing their prey with their teeth. In other words, it's just another idea. They're like, it's dangerous, when these warriors attack. It's the ferocity of their attack. So again, in verse 9, Revelation 9 says, we read that, let's see, let me get this right. They had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, of many horses running to battle. So both the riders and the horses, we know from historical archaeology and artifacts, both the riders and the horses wore iron armour. And the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, of many horses running to battle. So they're not flying horses when it talks about their wings, but rather this is another reference to the idea of them as locusts, right? They were described as locusts, and the idea they're sort of flying along the field of battle, like at great speed. And either they used chariots, or their heavy cavalry with their armour and the horse's armour was sort of rattling and clanking around like a chariot. That's what it sounds like. So and you can sort of say, you're just kind of making connections that aren't really there. Fine, but for me it works, because you've got the heart of the Christian church at this time being pitted against this empire which is expanding, which is bringing with it this false religion, and Christianity is really under threat, and everything fits so far from what I've looked at. And then verse 10 is just fascinating. Verse 10 says, and they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and the power was to hurt men 5 months. Okay, so nothing to do with the tails of their horses, I don't think, but rather to do with their doctrine. So just as they attack with dangerous physical ferocity, so they draw men after them, after their religion, which, like the tail of a scorpion, is venomous, it's poisonous. So it's sort of saying, as they're conquering land, as they're conquering all these different places, and we know that they conquered places like Antioch, which was again another really important Christian centre. They're kind of like lions at the front. They're kind of destroying all these other armies and so on, but behind them they're drawing people after their false teaching, their false doctrine, and that doctrine, that teaching, is like the poison of a scorpion. It's toxic, it will kill you spiritually, and I think that's the picture here that we're looking at. Their power is to hurt men 5 months. Yeah, I mean, some say 5 is the number of grace, if you've heard that. They point to the fact that Jesus used 5 loaves to feed 5,000 people. That God's grace limited this period of affliction. I don't know. I think it's just a way of saying that it was only for a set time. It wouldn't just go on and on and on. The conflict of the Sasanian Persians and the Eastern Roman Christians was not for hundreds of years. Wesley says it represents 79 common years. I don't know. I don't know how he can be so specific, but he is. But yes, I think if I look at it, what I think of is, okay, so it's for a set period of time God is going to allow this. Because we saw last week that God gives the angel a key to the bottomless pit. The pit opens, then all this stuff happens. Well, if God's given him a key to open it, God can give him a key to close it again. So it's just like God is in charge, and this is for a period of time. You remember last week I said it was a cleansing of the church, really, because it seems that, and we looked at it last week, that only certain people are to be afflicted, that those who have, the mark of God, or those which have, it was only those who have not the seal of God in their foreheads, and talked about that. It's like those who had the mark of God, the mark of the Lamb, are protected, and like God does this to cleanse his church. Sometimes he allows things. It's a kind of purging process. All right, so kind of finishing off now this short section. Verse 11 says, "And they have a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, and in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon." So, if you've ever read Pilgrim's Progress or watched one of the many movies or animations of it, you've heard of Apollyon. Apollyon is this big kind of, monster or dragon that Christian has to fight against. So what it's saying is, whilst obviously they had a physical king or Shah, what this reveals is that their real king is a spiritual being. They're being directed by this spiritual being, not Satan himself, but one of his evil angels, the angel of the bottomless pit. And his name, we'll just go with the Greek, which is Apollyon. The name means destroyer. Destroyer. And how does that work? Well, first of all, he destroys their enemies, doesn't he? He uses them and empowers them in some kind of spiritual way, and at first they're successful. They're kind of destroying all these people that are opposing them, but then he destroys them, and that's Satan's way, isn't it? The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That's how Satan works. And we saw it, we talked about it, I think it was last week, the man of the Gadarenes, how all these unclean spirits are in him. They say, my name is Legion, or we are Legion, for we're many. And they're sent out into the pigs, and then all the pigs just rush down into the sea and they're drowned. And that's this kind of, the angel of the bottomless pit is the destroyer. He's a destroyer. And we'll see that, and we'll see by the next sort of chapter or so, they start off destroying their enemies, but in the end they are destroyed, and their kind of whole empire is destroyed. So I think this shows also that people can be quite sort of ignorant of what and who guides them, and they can even think that what's providing that guidance is God when it isn't God. And so let's just take you through a couple of scriptures before we finish this bit. Turn to 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 3. So 2 Corinthians 4:3. But if our gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost, in whom the God of this world," notice that's a small g there, "the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them." So it's saying, here Satan is described as the God, with a small g, of this world, and he blinds the eyes of people's minds so that they think that they're following God, or they think that the way that they're going is right. Again, the scripture says, there is a way that seems right unto a man, but the end thereof leads to death. So it's like there's a way that seems right, or a religion that seems right, but actually it's not. It's Satan himself who's blinding the eyes of their minds. And it's also a reminder that our fight is not against people. It's not against men and women. It wasn't the fight of the Christian church at that time that were there in Byzantium, that were there in Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire. Their fight was not against the Sasanian Persians. Who's it against? Let's have a look. Ephesians 6. Ephesians 6 verse 12, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armour of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand." And if you read through the whole section there, it says to stand over and over again. Having done all, to stand. And that's the battle, isn't it? As we read through this, that's the battle. It's Satan coming to destroy the church. That's what's happening here. Sometimes he comes, as it were, as a dragon, like powerful, tearing, ripping, destroying, persecuting. At other times he comes like a serpent, subtle, trying to deceive people, just as he deceived Eve. And as we go through Revelation, you'll see that this is the church fighting on two fronts, really. On the one hand, fighting against persecution. We saw in the seven churches persecution from pagan Roman Empire, but then you'll see various places where they're under persecution, but also various places where this false doctrine is coming in. We looked at Arius and so on. So I hope that it will make Revelation accessible to you, so that you can at least get some idea of what's being spoken about. And as we go forward through it, hopefully some of the symbolism and the imagery that's used will become more familiar to you, and you'll start to see certain patterns and think, oh yeah, I've kind of seen this before, this idea. But yeah, that's all I have.